The moment Shedeur Sanders spoke with swagger, it sparked debate. Pundits said he needed humility. Commenters called it cocky. And one former NFL quarterback made it personal, claiming Sanders had no right to claim anything legendary until he did it under pressure, with no excuses. The implication was clear. For some, confidence is celebrated. For others, it's weaponized. But Sanders wasn't rattled. He stayed loud, stayed himself, and then played a game that backed every word he'd spoken.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
His performance didn't just speak to skill. It exposed the cultural tension around how quarterbacks are expected to act. Sanders challenged the comfort zone of a league, still holding on to narrow definitions of leadership. By succeeding on his terms, he revealed how much more powerful authenticity can be than conformity. And now, the conversation isn't about toning it down. It's about catching up. There's something uniquely satisfying about watching a critic go quiet. That awkward moment when a hot take doesn't age well. When a guy who was so sure you weren't ready suddenly has nothing to say. And after Shedeur Sanders' performance against the Ravens, you could feel the silence creeping in. Because when the receipts hit that hard, even the loudest voices can't talk over the results. The week leading up to the game was all noise. Sanders' name was circulating for all the wrong reasons. Not because of anything he did on the field, but because of what he dared to say off of it. A former NFL quarterback, someone who should have known better, decided to publicly question Sanders' potential, called out his confidence, suggested that if Shedeur wanted to be considered legendary, it was time to stop leaning on excuses. No blame on the O-line. No talk about receivers or coaching. Just perform or be exposed. It was a bold statement, and it backfired instantly because Shedeur didn't just show up. He showed out. He handled the Ravens like a veteran. He executed with poise, adjusted under pressure, and led with maturity. There was no panic, no ego, no flinching. Just results. Every single throw, every drive, every decision. It all added up to a performance that completely flipped the narrative. And not just for fans, but for the media that had spent weeks dragging him. That's the part that stands out. The way the narrative was already written before kickoff. Media commentators questioned his preparation, his leadership, and his personality. They framed his confidence as a character flaw. They dissected his demeanor, as if swagger couldn't coexist with hard work. And it wasn't just skepticism. It was condescension disguised as concern. Because when a fifth-round quarterback comes into the league and refuses to act like he's just happy to be here, it throws people off. There's this unspoken rule that late-round picks are supposed to stay quiet. No bold quotes. No headlines. Just wait your turn. Sanders broke that rule, and the reaction was swift. But here's what made the backlash so hollow. Shedeur wasn't just confident. He was prepared. He was capable. And when he got the opportunity to lead, he didn't just meet the moment. He took control of it. That game against the Ravens wasn't just a good showing for a rookie. It was a statement, a shift, the kind of performance that forces everyone to reassess what they thought they knew. Because when a fifth-round pick gets a start, the bar is low. But when he exceeds it this much, it exposes the assumptions baked into the system. Let's not ignore what this really highlighted. The disconnect between how quarterbacks are judged based on where they're drafted versus how they perform. Sanders didn't get the benefit of the doubt. He didn't walk in with inherited credibility. He had to earn it. And when he did, the silence from his critics said more than any praise ever could. What's even more frustrating is that he had to go above and beyond to get what other quarterbacks are handed. There's a pattern here that can't be ignored. When a confident young quarterback walks into the league with swagger, he's only celebrated if he fits a very specific mold. If he doesn't, that same confidence gets labeled as arrogance. He gets told to humble himself. He's expected to explain why he's confident, as if belief in yourself has to be justified before it's allowed. And that's exactly what Shedeur challenged. He didn't change who he was. He didn't shrink to fit the narrative. He stayed authentic, stood in his truth, and let his game speak for itself. And when he finally got his shot, the field became the loudest mic drop possible. There was no need for a rebuttal, no follow-up tweet, no quote, just execution. The former NFL quarterback who questioned him left with nothing but a clip that aged like milk, and the media that piled on, now stuck trying to spin the performance without admitting they were wrong. Some shifted tone, some moved the goalposts, but very few owned the fact that they doubted him for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't about skill. It wasn't about tape. It was about discomfort with a player who showed up with confidence and refused to downplay it. That's what this game exposed. The league and the media still struggle with quarterbacks who show up as their full selves, especially when those selves don't fit the classic, polished image of what a quarterback should be. Shedeur wasn't robotic in interviews. He wasn't self-deprecating for applause. He spoke like someone who knew his worth. And for some people, that's still too much. But what they forget is that leadership comes in different forms. And confidence, when rooted in work ethic and readiness, isn't ego, it's an edge. It's the difference between playing not to lose and playing to win. And that edge, it's what gave Shedeur the ability to walk into one of the most scrutinized positions in all of sports, in one of the most pressurized environments, and show everyone what they overlooked. His draft position didn't define him. It didn't cap his ceiling. It didn't limit his leadership. What it did, though, was force him to prove more than he should have had to. And he did, in full view of every person who underestimated him. There's something deeply telling about how quickly the media flipped once Sanders played well. The same headlines that once called him unproven suddenly lean into words like poised and composed. But the truth is, he was always those things. They just weren't willing to see it until he produced numbers they couldn't ignore. That's the problem. And it's not just about Shedeur. It's about the system. Because when players who carry themselves differently have to overperform just to get equal respect, it means the bar is broken. And the fact that his personality was dissected more than his actual football skills says everything about what needs to change. This wasn't just a good rookie performance. It was a cultural disruption. Shedeur Sanders didn't just beat the Ravens. He beat the narrative. He pushed back against years of narrow definitions of leadership and proved that you can lead with confidence, be yourself, and still get results. And now the NFL has a decision to make, because Sanders isn't going anywhere. And if this is just a beginning, the league and the media around it will need to rethink how they evaluate not just quarterbacks, but leaders. Charisma doesn't cancel out composure. Confidence doesn't mean a lack of humility. And when someone like Shedeur shows up prepared and authentic, it should be celebrated, not second. So if you watched that game and saw more than just a good night, if you felt like this performance was about more than stats, you're right. This was bigger than football. This was about fairness, about perception, about finally giving respect where it's been earned, not just when it's convenient, but when it's deserved. Let us know what you think. Was this the moment Shedeur Sanders proved the league wrong? Or is it just the start of something bigger? Something that could finally shift how quarterbacks are seen, judged, and trusted? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you're done with the old narratives, and don't forget to subscribe. Because if this game showed us anything, it's that the story is only getting started. And Shedeur Sanders is the one holding the pen. The spotlight doesn't lie. And when it hits a player like Shedeur Sanders, already the subject of media skepticism, already under pressure, already carrying the weight of expectations his draft slot didn't justify, it reveals everything. Here's what it showed. He was ready. More than ready. And everything they said he couldn't be, he already was. That game against the Ravens wasn't just about scoring points. It wasn't about outdueling a defense. It was about dismantling every narrative that was stacked against him before he'd even taken a meaningful NFL snap. You could feel it in the pregame chatter. Shedeur wasn't being analyzed the way other quarterbacks are. His play style wasn't the main focus. His mechanics weren't the headline. What got the attention? His confidence, his interviews, his posture, his name. And yeah, that part isn't just unfair, it's familiar. Because when certain quarterbacks come into the league with swagger, it's marketed. When Shedeur did it, it was dissected. So when a former NFL quarterback publicly challenged him, essentially saying, prove it without the excuses, it didn't just feel like typical critique. It felt personal. It felt loaded. It felt like a reminder that Shedeur wasn't just being evaluated as a player. He was being judged as a presence. And that's what made what came next so powerful. Because he delivered. Not good for a fifth-rounder, delivered. Not held his own, delivered. He controlled the game, with decision-making that felt far beyond his experience, with pocket presence that made the blitz look irrelevant, with throws that screamed preparation, not panic. He didn't need a narrative rewrite. He forced it. By the time the game ended, all the pre-game speculation had aged out of relevance. There was no room left to question his readiness, his maturity, his talent. Everything the critics had demanded, he showed them, and then some. And that former quarterback who told him to stop talking and start producing, completely silenced. But this goes way beyond a single performance. This was a cultural shift. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't just silence critics with talent. He challenged the idea that confidence, charisma, and individuality are somehow risks when it comes to quarterbacking. For years, the league has rewarded safe, predictable, quiet, guys who stick to the script both on the field and off it. And for just as long, it's been suspicious of anyone who strays from that mold. Shedeur didn't just stray. He broke the mold entirely. He didn't need to tone it down to earn respect. He didn't need to shrink to be trusted. He stayed completely true to himself. And the fact that he still had to prove so much more than others to get an ounce of the same credibility, that says everything about how broken the evaluation process still is. We have to talk about the draft narrative. Because let's be honest, if Shedeur Sanders had been taken in the first round, the reaction to performance would have been completely different. There'd be highlight reels everywhere. Segment after segment about the future of the franchise. People would be penciling him into the Pro Bowl already. Instead, there was hesitation, backtracking, awkward praise laced with qualifiers. He looked good, but let's see if it's sustainable. The Ravens' defense was off. You could hear the reluctance in their voices, as if giving him credit meant admitting that they had it wrong from the start. Because they did. They got it wrong not just about his ability, but about what makes a quarterback effective. Shedeur doesn't need to tone it down. He doesn't need to act like someone he's not. His edge isn't a liability. It's his advantage. His authenticity is what connects him to his teammates. His preparation is what separates him from other late-round picks. And his confidence? It's earned. It always has been. He was just never allowed to say it out loud, without getting labeled. And the irony here is brutal. Because the very same critics who warned that his confidence would be his downfall are now scrambling to spin it as a sign of growth. Like he wasn't already. This player. Like he didn't already put in the work. Like this performance was a breakthrough instead of a confirmation. He didn't become great. He's just finally being seen. That's why this game felt so significant. Not because it changed who Shedeur is, but because it finally forced people to confront their own bias. The truth is, the NFL has always had a hard time making space for quarterbacks who don't conform to its outdated leadership image. And that image, let's be clear, is narrow. It rewards stoicism. It penalizes personality. It uplifts quiet self-belief while punishing vocal confidence, especially when it comes from players who challenge the league's cultural norms. So when Shedeur walked into the league confident, composed, and unafraid of being misunderstood, it was never about ego. It was about defiance. A refusal to play small to make others feel comfortable. And when he backed it up with that performance, it became undeniable. He didn't just outperform expectations. He exposed how limited those expectations were to begin with. And while others might be quick to move the goalposts, let's see him do it again. Can he sustain over the season? What they can't do is erase what already happened, what was already proven. And what was proven is this. Leadership doesn't look one way. Talent doesn't need a top 10 pick to be real. And when someone brings their full self to the field, it doesn't need to be softened to be respected. What Shedeur did was bigger than football. He cracked the foundation of an NFL culture that still prefers its quarterbacks wrapped in packaging it can control. But leadership, real leadership, isn't about compliance. It's about showing up as your whole self, regardless of who's uncomfortable with it. And make no mistake, he made a lot of people uncomfortable. He forced them to rethink the way they frame confidence, to ask why some players are praised for swagger while others are punished for it, to confront the bias that keeps creeping into how talent is evaluated, not based on performance, but personality. But more than that, he offered an alternative, a new model, one where authenticity and excellence don't cancel each other out, one where quarterbacks can be themselves and still lead, still win, still command respect. He didn't ask for permission to lead. He just did it. And now the league has to respond. Because if Shedeur Sanders continues on his trajectory, the NFL isn't just getting a new face, it's getting a new standard. One that doesn't require conformity. One that's not filtered through draft status or media approval. One that allows greatness come in forms people aren't used to, but better start accepting. This wasn't just a good game. It was a cultural pivot. And while the talking heads will keep trying to control the narrative, what happened on that field is already written in bold. Shedeur Sanders backed it all up. Every word, every stare, every soundbite. He proved that being unapologetically yourself in this league isn't a weakness, it's power. And the only people who couldn't see that were the ones too busy trying to make him someone he never needed to be. And let's be real. If Shedeur Sanders had faltered against the Ravens, we already know what the headlines would have been. Overhyped. Reality check. Too confident. Not enough production. The NFL media machine had those takes preloaded and ready to fire. That's how it always goes when a player dares to be outspoken before proving himself by their standards. And when that player also happens to be a fifth-round draft pick, the leash is microscopic. Every misstep gets magnified. Every expression of confidence gets reframed as cockiness, and every success, it has to be perfect to even be acknowledged. But Shedeur didn't just meet expectations. He demolished the ones people had placed on him. That game didn't just shift how we talk about Sanders. It exposed how unprepared the media was for him to succeed on his own terms. They were ready to break him down. They weren't ready to build him up. And here's where it gets even more telling. As the game progressed, as Shedeur made the right reads, escaped pressure, delivered strikes, and carried himself like a seasoned pro, you could see the discomfort setting in. Analysts started scrambling for new framing. He looks more polished than expected. Maybe he's more ready than we thought. But all of that praise came with an asterisk, because saying they got it wrong would require confronting their own bias. The truth is, they never saw him clearly. They saw the last name. They saw the flash. They saw the confidence. And instead of asking how those things might actually help him lead in today's NFL, they decided he must be a distraction, that he had too much personality, that he was too brand aware. As if quarterbacks don't also exist in a world where media presence and personal identity matter more than ever. But Shedeur's performance proved that the league's obsession with manufactured humility doesn't win games. Preparation does. Poise does. And confidence, the real kind, the kind built from repetition and experience and clarity, definitely does. It wasn't just about throws. It was about presence. He looked like a quarterback who knew the playbook, knew the defense, and knew exactly how much space he had to be great. That's not luck. That's not hype. That's not just one good game. That's someone who is always capable and finally given the stage to show it. And now, whether people like it or not, the NFL has to live with what happened, because the narratives they try to pin on Shedeur don't hold anymore. The he's not ready story? Done. The he's too confident critique? Useless. The draft position determined ceiling argument? Crushed. This is what happens when talent is paired with resilience. When a quarterback refuses to apologize for believing in himself. When he understands the game, the system, and the optics, and then decides to rewrite all of it in real time. That's what makes this performance so much bigger than a stat sheet. It's not about the number of touchdowns or passing yards. It's about the fact that Shedeur had to drag respect out of people who should have been giving it freely. He had to force the conversation to change. Not by talking louder, but by playing better than they thought he could. And now that he's proven it, what's next? Because let's be clear, this isn't the end of anything. This is a beginning. The beginning of a new standard. The beginning of a different kind of quarterback narrative. One where personality isn't a threat. where individuality isn't a red flag, one where being yourself doesn't mean being underestimated. Shedeur Sanders showed what it looks like when you stay true to who you are, block out the noise, and handle business. And the result? He didn't just play the game, he changed the conversation around it. And for the people who insisted he wasn't ready, they're now part of the footnote. So here's the question. How many more times does a player like Shedeur have to prove himself before the league actually adjusts? Not just the scouting reports, not just the depth charts, but the way quarterbacks are covered, judged, and talked about in every press conference, every panel, every mic'd up moment. Because we can't keep pretending this is about football alone. This is about culture. This is about who's allowed to lead without compromise. And this is about what happens when a player refuses to dull his shine just to make the gatekeepers comfortable. Shedeur Sanders didn't ask for permission. He just delivered. And if you're someone who's tired of the same recycled quarterback narratives, if you're over the idea that humility has to mean silence, or that leadership only comes in one tone of voice, then this moment probably felt bigger than a win. It felt like change. Let us know what you took away from it. Did Shedeur's performance flip the script, or just start a new one entirely? Drop a comment. Hit the like button if you're done with the old ways of thinking, and subscribe to stay locked in. Because if this is how he plays when they doubt him, just wait until they finally start believing.